We need to be evolving. We need to be getting healthier, because when you have a healthy system, your perception is different. You cannot maintain high states of consciousness without a really finely tuned, healthy body that has the equipment that's working beautifully.
You're listening to the Feed Your Wild podcast, a conscious lifestyle show about all things nourishing for your body, mind, and soul. I'm Vanessa Rodriguez, and join me for candid conversations with changemakers, exploring health and wellness, food as medicine, intuition and spirituality, and nature-based practices that will transform your health and feed all parts of your wild self. Hello there, and welcome back to Feed Your Wild. This is Vanessa Rodriguez, functional nutritionist, Akashic record reader, and intuitive nourishment guide. And you guys, this is the very first interview episode of 2021 of this new year. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it is on the 11th, 111. This has been a really significant number, I think, for so many people. This is a very common number that we see when we are going through a spiritual awakening, when you begin to see synchronicities around you. You're literally arriving certain frequencies where angel numbers, as you may call them, or spirit numbers and synchronicities become the norm. And it also becomes sort of this intermediary between oneself and the unseen world. So 111, 1111 have been really significant in my own journey. And I'm of the belief that when you continue to see certain signs and symbols, it really needs to be interpreted through your unique filter, your inner authority and spiritual understanding and heart, rather than going straight to Google's and looking up what it might mean, although that can be helpful in the beginning of your journey. 111 has been an indicator for me when I look back, and really the beginning of what I would call my spiritual awakening process or my alignment process. It started when my mom was sick with breast cancer, and it only amplified after she crossed over. And yesterday, January 10th, was the anniversary of my mom's passing. And what's interesting is after she had died, so many other synchronicities would come through. I know for many people who have had loved ones pass over, certain symbols such as the butterfly or dragonfly are very common to see. Well, that was very true for me, but also not just 111, but 110, which is January 10th, the day that my mom crossed over. And so yesterday was a significant day because it marked 11 years since her passing. So already I have 11 years of this today on the 11th, and then 111. All the ones are all over the place. So if you're seeing that yourself, just know to tune in and what are the messages that are there available to you. And really, it's not about looking outside of yourself. It's about looking at what's going on in this moment. What am I feeling? What's my situation? And really tuning in to the deeper truth and meaning behind it. So we have our very first interview on this day, on the 11th. And I don't think it's a coincidence that we have Penny Kelly on the podcast as our very first guest. Penny Kelly is an incredible person, a human being who is not only a researcher, a teacher, an author, a naturopathic physician, but she is on a mission to support the expansion of consciousness of our world as we move forward into new terrain, so to speak. Penny Kelly's book, she wrote quite a few, but one of the ones that we're going to be talking about today is Robes, a Book of Coming Changes. Now, after our interview on the 4th, I recorded the introduction. So every interview that I have, I usually record an introduction to have in the very beginning to lead into the interview. Well, I recorded it, and as we all know, a couple days later, we had a pretty significant event occur in the United States, unprecedented occurrence where people infiltrated the Capitol. Something that hadn't happened, I think I read, not since 1812 or something like that. And it is no surprise to me that this occurred looking at the astrology and after my conversation with Penny Kelly. And in her book, she outlines a lot of events and themes that we are already seeing. So this is such a timely interview that I had to re-record this introduction in light of everything that's been happening. So at the time of this new recording of this introduction, it's January 7th. And so it's the day after that event on January 6th. And I felt the need to come back and really look at what's going on in terms of the energetics and astrology in this time, and then move into our interview with Penny. So this week we have a new moon in Capricorn. It's the first new moon of the year of 2021, and it falls in the sign of Capricorn. And this is on January 12th or 13th, depending on where you live in the world, depending on your time zone. This new moon falls on 23 degrees of Capricorn, which is really interesting because all through 2020, this was a pretty sensitive degree. This is the very degree that back 1 year from now, January of 2020, we had Saturn and Pluto aligned at that very degree. And we all know what happened in 2020. So it's interesting that we're back here again. And a Capricorn new moon would typically feel grounding and has this grounding influence. And this is an amazing time to really connect with our bodies, with the earth, with our ancestors, where we came from, our roots. And I think that this is still very true because of the volatile energies that are surrounding this new moon, the things that are happening that can kilter us off balance. So we really need to stay grounded. So what is going on? Well, again, I'm not an astrologer, but looking from my perspective of some of the things that I've known, and also of those of astrologers that I admire and listen to, and my friends who I've consulted, we're looking at a lot of interesting energies from planets that are causing some upheaval and some restlessness. Yesterday, January 10th, the dwarf planet Eris, which is the goddess of discord or strife, and there's a whole mythology behind Eris. So if you're interested in diving deeper into this stuff, I highly recommend that you do, because there's so many layers through the stories that will help us understand some of these energetic influences. Well, through that myth of Eris, there's sort of this sense of the theme of people who don't feel acknowledged or seen or protesting. And so obviously we've seen this already January 6th. And because I'm recording this on January 7th, I can't future tell of what's actually going to happen on the rest of these days. But January 10th, which the time that you're listening to this, the publication of this podcast was yesterday, Eris is moving stationary direct in Aries. So this can be seen sort of like this period of awakening again that we are moving into. And tomorrow with this new moon in Capricorn, it's kind of this reminder for us to look at how far we've gotten since last year, since that point in time when we also had that moment at 23 degrees Capricorn. Capricorn has a lot to do with mastery. And now that we're looking forward into the future with some of the more Aquarian type of themes, it's really looking at setting an intention for what it is that you want in your life with this new moon. And partly it's kicking off this new era of what we could call, quote, the new earth, thinking in a bigger way and really staying anchored in the heart with a vision for what a more beautiful world could be. there are so many configurations here within the astrology and like with these dwarf planets that have themes around power and the demolition of power structures and power struggles. So again, it's sort of like these themes of the collapse of the old. And we touch on this a bit in this interview with Penny because, as you will find out, she had a visitation from some guides, so to speak, that basically gave her the download of all of these different events that were to happen. A lot of it seems to be happening right now in these, what we could call transitional years that we're living in. January 14th, the planet Uranus is gone direct, and this is the planet of revolution and awakening. So again, we're going to be seeing, I think, the continuation of this energetically, if not in a very real way, as it relates to our external world and politics and social and civil unrest. So we got a lot of rebellious energy going on in January, but that theme is really going to carry on for the rest of this year in 2021. Someone had mentioned as a comment in one of my Instagram posts about the January reading, bringing up the return of Pluto for the United States. So Pluto, the United States is experiencing what's called a Pluto return. And this is when Pluto comes back, gradually comes back from its natal place of the United States. So yes, the United States has its own natal birth chart. You can geek out on that a little bit more. Depending on who you follow, they'll have different charts. But Pluto is going to come back to its original natal position in 2022. And so we are leading up to this point of literally kind of like a rebirth of America. And I'm talking about the US because I live here. I'm American, but I believe a lot at stake as it relates to what's actually happening in the United States and some of this rebirth and breaking down. So something to look at, pay attention to this year and in particular next year when we're really tuning into these themes of revolution and rebirth. Disruptive events such as what went down yesterday at the Capitol and what might have occurred since the time of this recording and will occur brings up a lot of questions. And I know that since we've been experiencing this pandemic, a lot of people that I have encountered, clients, loved ones, are really asking the big questions of themselves and of their lives, looking deeper into like, what is the meaning behind all of this? And moving more toward alignment. So questions like, what future are we unfolding in our world today? Where are we going together as a collective, as a civilization? Whether you're looking for insights, answers, information regarding the future of the world or where we are going as a people, I believe that this book, Robes, A Book of Coming Changes, written by Penny Kelly, is a beautiful one to look to. Robes is a true account, a true story of a group of little men in brown robes who visited the author, Penny Kelly, over a period of a few years in the early 80s. As you'll hear, Penny Kelly had experienced prior to this a kundalini awakening, and she'll explain what that is. And it basically opened up her psychic awareness and senses. And when she had these visitations, these men showed her pictures of the future. Now, I know some of you may be like, okay, what? You want me to believe that this woman was visited by little men and that told her the future and that this is actually real? And what I always recommend is that you use your discernment and come to it with an open mind. I'm not here to tell anybody what to think or believe. That's not my business. But I am here to share information that I believe is supportive for the collective and for you on a personal level. And I can honestly say that reading this book has been incredibly profound in terms of really affirming a lot of the things that I already intuitively came into knowing, but didn't quite know what it would look like. And so I knew that I wanted to have Penny on the podcast to speak about the through line messages that she received over the course of these visitations, and the reason why they were showing her these pictures of the future. In a series of 16 visits, the robes showed Kelly information in a vast array of topics ranging from the weather patterns and extremes to war, to the breakup of nations, and to the rise of business to power, and then the fall of business and capitalism. They also touch on food as medicine, plants, earth as a living being, education, human development, ecological destruction, sexuality, and the hidden potential within the human being. This book and the information that was given to Penny is so dense. There is so much here. It took me, I read it twice. I'm going to read it again, but there's just so much to really sink our teeth into and allow our minds to really open up to the possibilities of what could happen and what our future looks like. What I really appreciated was that the little men in brown robes wanted to provide a picture of the future so that we knew where we were going and saw the beauty in that, and to really encourage us to return to our inner authority, our sovereignty, and personal responsibility, and to honestly prepare us for what is coming. The most important thing for you to remember as you look at these coming changes, said the little men in brown robes, is that things could be so much easier if you understood why these things are happening and if you worked with them instead of against them. For you to work with them, however, you must have some idea of where you are going. And this is what they provide in this book, is a snapshot of where we are going. Because there was such a vast array of topics that the robes cover in this book and the information that they gave Penny, we really needed to hone in on just a select few areas. But my intention for this interview and this podcast is to provide empowering information that piques your curiosity, that opens up the possibilities and really gets you to ask the hard questions and to pursue what is in alignment for you and your vision of a more beautiful world. If there's anything within this interview where you were like, what? I want to hear more about that. What are they talking about? I really do recommend that you get the book yourself and to dive in, because there's something in here for everyone. A lot of questions that I know that I had and a lot of other folks tend to have are addressed in this book with the messages that the robes gave to Penny. While we don't specifically get into the so-called breakup of nations, I did want to make mention that she has a whole chapter on that and information that she received telepathically about it. And I think that it's pertinent within the political climate and what's happening within the government right now. So if you were interested in diving a little bit more into that, while we do not cover that specifically in this interview, it is available in her book. So I recommend that you go reference that firsthand. What we do cover in this interview, however, is first Penny's kundalini experience. Like, what is the kundalini awakening? What did that mean for her? And how did she come to write this book? We talk about reconnecting to Mother Earth and Earth as a living being. And Penny shares what she has learned about the energetic workings and true scientific principles of Mother Nature and the connection between our collective actions, for example, cutting down trees, and the disruption of weather patterns, Penny breaks down how these intelligent living beings called trees balance weather patterns through hydrological cycles, wind, and talks about them through the perspective of electromagnetic fields and energy. We go deep into the nature of the human and human health, what it means to be truly healthy, the importance of constructive interference, and how to bring your frequency back into tune for true health. Penny shares what she says are her non-negotiables for supporting health and expands on the relationship between humans and plants, including how plants will calibrate according to their environment and who is around them. Penny talks a lot about inner authority and the importance of really supporting ourselves and getting out of victim consciousness and moving toward self-sovereignty, what it means to be really self-sufficient and why it's important to have all of your basic needs covered yourself. Penny also offers a list of helpful questions to assess your level of preparedness and to get us thinking about these basic needs. Penny has some good advice for people who are stuck in fear or experiencing increased anxiety, especially during this time of the pandemic and these bigger cosmic transitions. She also answers questions from parents about how to support the growth and development of new babes coming into this world. And she touches on a new educational system that she was shown telepathically through her experience and how that led her to get involved with efforts to create it, cradle to grave learning. And really how to support and teach children to develop their own intuitive abilities and capacities to become truly sovereign beings. There is so much here, and yet it goes by so incredibly fast. So I wanted to leave us, before we dive into our interview, with a quote directly from the book, Robes. And I think this is also really pertinent in this time, particularly with the events that are occurring in the United States. And quote, "Our question to you as a people would be, what has gone wrong with your understanding of power that millions of people will focus their fears in one person or one organization, and then let that person or organization manipulate them using their own fear? There is nothing to fear. And how is it that millions of hearts working together cannot come up with enough love to convert even one fearful leader and a few misguided followers? The world has truly fallen out of love." I'm all about falling back into love, and my hope is that those of you listening tend to the seeds that have been planted for you to be able to do that within your own life, so we can really make some big changes together. All right, y'all. With that, let's get into our chat with Penny Kelly. Today, we have a very special guest. I am so excited to share Penny Kelly and her work. Penny Kelly is a writer, teacher, author, publisher, consultant, naturopathic physician, and researcher of consciousness. Early in her career, she was an engineer for Chrysler Corporation, but left there in 1979 after a full spontaneous awakening of kundalini to study the brain, consciousness, intelligence, intuition, and cognition. This was followed by 18 years of work as an educational consultant specializing in accelerated and brain-compatible teaching and learning, working with both schools and corporations. And of course, Penny is the author of Robes, a book of coming changes, which we are talking about today. Penny, thank you so much for coming on today.
You're welcome, and it's really good to be here. Thank you.
Well, I was first introduced to your work through my naturopathic doctor. Shout out to Dr. Ajana Miki. And she had actually mentioned your book because we were having a conversation about the changes that we're experiencing and this virus and pandemic and various other things that reminded her about your book. So she told me about it. I was so intrigued. I went home. I basically stalked you, Penny, and I bought your book. I read it a couple of times. It really is one of those that you have to go back over and over again because there's just so much in there. And I was like, I have to have you on the podcast because there's just so much value and a wealth of information and knowledge that you share. So thanks again for being here.
Yeah, thank you. I think, the book is not what I would call light reading. It is packed, and there was stuff I left out even, but what I tried to do was to give this picture of this kind of upbeat, there's stuff going to happen that's not going to be, fun. And that may frighten us, or that may be really, really inconvenient, but we're moving toward a whole new world of possibility. And that's what they wanted. They said point blank several times, we definitely want you to make it through this and not go back to primitive. So.
Yes. So I'd love to paint a little background picture for folks who are not familiar. I'm going to pre-record a separate intro, kind of giving a little bit more information. But I would love for you to first touch on the beginning, like your experience. And I know that a lot of people listening are like, what the heck is a kundalini awakening? Like, how did you receive this information? So, in kind of just like a really short synopsis of how that unfolded, how did you come to write this book?
I think probably the best way to say it in a short kind of a capsule form would be to say that kundalini is an event that happens within the body-mind system that opens the individual to unlimited, unbounded consciousness. If you can't imagine it if you haven't had it, because it is so profoundly powerful. And when you're trying to handle consciousness that has no boundaries, you very quickly, well, I wasn't very quick myself, but you quickly learn that it's important to be still and to be silent, because anything you're curious about, anything you want to know, anything you're worried about, it comes to you instantly. And you can, and you end up having to deal with that. And so you know everything in any time frame, any individual. You read minds, you're in and out of the body, you're all over the place in terms of information pouring in. And the result is that, for me, was like, I think I'm going crazy. I'm going insane. I know I am. How can I hide this? Mm-hmm. And my effort to learn to manage that and to deal with that was huge. It lasted for years. It took 17 years, actually, before I felt like, okay, I'm kind of not normal again, but I can understand. I knew what was happening by that point. And during that time, there are beings who roam the world, if I can say it like that, and they just watch for people who have awakened fully. And so they come and they try to help, and that's how this book got written. They came and they showed me all sorts of things. There were a number of visits. They were anywhere from an hour to 2 hours long. During that time, a huge amount of information was shown to me. It was like being in the movies, not watching the movies, being in the movies. And you're a participant in the future and how it's going to unfold and what you need to be prepared for and how to handle yourself and what to think about the world and et cetera, et cetera.
So that event, the Kundalini awakening, occurred at the end of the 70s for you, and then
81.
81. Okay.
Yeah. And then they asked me to write down what I had seen. So that's how the book got written.
And when you say they, you're referring to the little men in brown robes, right?
Yeah, I guess I didn't mention that. There I was peeling potatoes for supper one night, and all of a sudden it was one of those moments where you have this like your hair stands up on the back of your neck, and I thought, oh, I'm not alone. And my consciousness had been so problematic for almost a year, and I turned around and there was this group of little men in brown robes standing in my kitchen, and I freaked. I wasn't very gracious. And so they left, and then they came back later, and I refused to acknowledge that they were there. So they said, "Well, we'll come back again when you're in a little more agreeable mood." It was obvious they weren't going to give up. I needed something. I didn't realize what they were offering at the time, but I realize it now. So they started, when I finally said, they wanted to show me some pictures. They said, "We'd like to show you some pictures." And I was like, okay, all right, I'll look at the pictures. And my thought was, I'll see the pictures. It'll take 5 minutes. They'll go away. Well, that isn't what happened. And so here I am with this book and this huge amount of information. And I'm watching most of it unfold right now going, okay, we should be ready at a number of levels. So,
yeah, and so it sounded like there was quite some time with the visits over the years, and then you didn't actually come to write the book until the 90s, right?
That's true. They were coming to me over the course of 1980, 81, and then I knew it was the last visit. I kind of knew, but then 11 years later, long after I was trying to forget about what I knew, and I was just surprised one night when they showed up and said, "Hey, we want you to write down what we showed you." And there was some discussion. I was not at all agreeable with that either, I said, no, I'll never remember it all. It was a ton of information from so many different aspects and angles. And they said, no, you'll remember. You've been trying to forget for 11 years and you haven't forgotten anything. Okay. So I started, and it took me about 6 years, from 1992 to 1996, when I finally had the book in what I called reasonable format. And then I decided, no, I'm not publishing this thing. I hate this kind of book. And so then, a little event happened that convinced me that I should publish it. And I was like, okie doke. So I put it out there, and I published only 20 copies and said, there, I did my duty. And I was sure that it was going to disappear. But a couple of businessmen called me in quick succession from different places around the country. I have no idea how they got copies of that book, because it was just something that I published from FedEx or from Kinko's, and they each one said something in the neighborhood or similar to, "I just want to thank you for writing that book. I finally understand what I've been seeing. I finally understand where we are going. I finally know that I'm not crazy because I'm seeing all the same things." And I was like, oh, okay. And then the demand started increasing. It's never had any, not one dime of advertising go into it. It's just been word of mouth. I finally, just thought, okay, let's get this really published as a book, not something glued together from Kinko's. And it took off, and it's been in the top 100 books on Amazon on and off over the past 20 years or whatever it's been, 25 years.
It's incredible, Penny. And I just appreciate your honesty about your apprehension because I feel like, so many of us, while we may see things happening, feel intuitively, know within ourselves that there are big major changes, which we're going to get into, that are happening, but it's almost like when we see the things that we don't want to see or that are totally unexpected, it could be really hard to break our realities in our mind. And so I just appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you, because I really did not, I even considered using a pen name so that nobody would know that I wrote it, because it was not anything that had 1 ounce of confirmation in the world at that time. The internet did not exist. They kept rattling on about this global network and how important it was. There were no women in politics. They kept saying, this and that, all the stuff that was going to happen, the Trade Center, the Berlin Wall. And finally, I thought, okay, I'll put it in there because I have to be honest about what they showed me. And here we are, some years later.
Well, speaking of these changes and some of those events you'd mentioned, I'd love to kind of go through some of the elements. I mean, I have so many bookmarks. I dog-eared almost every page, and I have a ton of notes. But we're gonna go through the highlights, because I really recommend everybody to get your book and to read it for themselves so that they can get a lot more, because there's just so much that we can't fit in this podcast. But I love that you break it down by these chapters. And one of the first chapters that really resonated with me, because essentially it's kind of like why I started the podcast in the first place, was looking at our relationship to the earth as a living being, and our relationship to plants, and just like the living world around us that we have been severely disconnected from. So as the little men in brown robes, we'll call them robes, I guess, right? From here on.
That's what I called them, because I never said, well, who are you guys? I want to see your ID. That never even occurred to me. I was just like, go away, go away, go away. That didn't happen, so.
Yeah, so here we are. Well, I'd love to expand on some of the things that they had mentioned about the earth and earth as a living being. What was the main takeaway that you received, like the teaching about the earth and our connection to it?
Wow, there were a number of them. I think because the first thing that they showed me was the earth kind of rolling a little bit. That scared the daylights out of me. So at that point, I got very interested, or well, actually much later, I got very interested in astronomy and solar sciences and things like that. And so the takeaway is that, wow, what goes on in a solar system among planetary systems is far more interesting and bizarre than I would have ever suspected. I think when they talked about electricity and our modern civilization, they said in a point-blank kind of way, you absolutely must reconnect with Mother Nature. If you don't, you will not survive. And that really has gone through a number of stages for me now over the last few decades. And those stages, I would say, first I thought that we were really needing to be much more, I needed to be much more of an environmentalist, and I was not at that time. I was not an environmentalist. I wasn't into any of that kind of thinking. In fact, I actually hated that kind of topic, and I poo-pooed that. And so I ended up, I had been raised as a farmer, kind of not really a farmer, but we were part of a farm. And that's a long story all by itself. But the understanding that I had was that I needed to give up my fancy education and my knowledge and go back to being a farmer. And I was like, hell no, I'm not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So, but gradually that smoothed out to understanding that we needed to be responsible for feeding ourselves, that we needed to be responsible for our energy use on the planet, and that there was new energy coming, and that it would be necessitated by some disastrous things that would happen that we would need to keep in mind and prepare for. And there were some, just a whole bunch of, I guess I'll call it, there were messages about self-sufficiency. I hope that makes sense to your people. Self-sufficiency being, do you know how to survive in the face of, or in the lap of Mother Nature? And so that was the question that they left dangling. I ended up going back to my farm roots and the fact that we had raised all of our own food when I was growing up. We made all of our own clothes. We built our own house. We fixed our own machinery and equipment. We did our own medicine. We did not run to the doctor. There were a million folk ways and a million ways to heal, and I ended up going back to all of those eventually. And just really, I have come to understand that reconnecting with Mother Nature did not just mean environmentalism. It meant understanding how Mother Nature works energetically and in the fine scientific principles that she's based on, because those hold the secret to being able to become a very finely advanced civilization, a space-based civilization, and a civilization that is not subject to the fits and the whims and the disasters that occur when a population is only able to live on the surface of a planet and cannot get off that planet. So I don't really talk about that in the book because the book was written so long ago, but over the past 20 years, my work with Dr. William Levengood, I learned a lot of plasma physics, and that really opened my eyes in many ways, and so it's gone to a whole new level. All that messaging about the planet and understanding Mother Nature. How does Mother Nature build a tree or a plant? How does she move water? What are the systems that she's using? And what are the principles that she uses to accomplish those things? The energetic principles. How is the human being built? How do you really heal that human being without doing it like we're doing it now, which is kind of like removing a wart with a sledgehammer? It's not very effective. It does almost more damage than the healing is targeted to do. And so how do you use food? How do you use frequencies? So lots of stuff, lots of takeaways just from that.
Yes, I appreciate you bridging that, the connection with Earth, Mother Earth as a living being, and then our health, and how, chopping off something from our, an organ or whatever to fix a problem is not really addressing the root issue. And it makes me think about when they were in the chapter on weather extremes. So they do touch on, what I think everybody is really thinking about, what's going on with these weather patterns, and a lot of destruction that we're doing, that we're capable of and have been doing as humans. And that connection to the weather extremes. Well, the robes seem to break it down pretty simply. I'm sure there was a lot more to it, but what you had shared, especially about the trees and the action of cutting them down, could you elaborate a little bit on how that's connected to some of these weather extremes?
Yeah, I'll try to make it simple. When a tree grows, it literally starts from a seed or, some kind of acorn or whatever. Let's use the acorn just as a good example. And it opens up and it puts in some roots and it grows in the shape of the energy forms that are embedded, and this gets into some pretty complex science here, but the forms are embedded not only in the acorn, but in the location coming out of the earth, out of the soil, at that place where that seed has germinated. And the tree takes the shape of its inherent natural, tendency, which is a tree, and it also then follows the frequency or the energetic pathways coming up out of the earth at that particular location. So every tree, you recognize an oak tree, you recognize a maple tree, you recognize a birch tree, etc. They have inherent natural shapes, but they then differentiate based on the location coming out of the earth, and or the energy coming out of the earth at that location. And then, once the tree is up, it is responsible for managing the hydrological cycle, which is huge. It's a cycle in which the tree puts roots down 30, 40, 50 feet in many cases, sometimes more. There's as much below ground as there is above ground. And those roots mine minerals from the soil, up out of the deep soil, and they also, the tree has an electromagnetic field around it that most people call an aura. And that aura changes depending on whether the tree is thirsty or not. And so the tree calls for water, and when you get a bunch of trees calling for water, it changes the electromagnetic signature of the location where they are, and that then brings water in their direction. Everything is created using electromagnetic frequencies, and so then you cut down the trees. Now you have a mess. Not only do you not have protection cover for Mother Earth, who is meant to stay cool, and we humans are meant to stay cool. We're not meant to be living at 80 and 90 degree temperatures. That's unhealthy, actually. And we've lost what's called high immune function. High immune function is so powerful that you do not need a coat, and you do not really even need shoes, and you will be comfortable playing outside in 30, 40 degree temperatures, even if you are barefoot. And we have lost that function a long time ago. You get a little breeze going by and people get sick. It's like, oh my gosh. And they don't understand that we're sort of devolving, and so what I'm trying to do is say, hey, we need to be evolving. We need to be getting healthier, because when you have a healthy system, your perception is different. You cannot maintain high states of consciousness without a really finely tuned, healthy body that has equipment that's working beautifully. Mm-hmm. So your perception falls into the toilet. Most people do not know that depression is a state of nutritional deficiency almost across the board. So we have a lot to learn. People have a lot to learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I appreciated the Robes breaking down sort of the imbalance that occurs when we start doing things like cutting trees down, and that imbalance, like it looking at it in a way beyond what we already know, and
right.
And then making that connection in, as you were doing, with physical health for humans. I love their discussion on like the energetics and the biophysiological realities and connections between human and plants, and what you were speaking into, like disease kind of being like out of tune in a way in terms of our energetics. Could you expand a little bit on that? I think they call out healing as a process of constructive interference. What does that mean?
Okay, so the entire human body is made up of frequencies, okay? So a frequency is a wave in the spatial medium that we're all kind of floating and walking around in. okay? And the human is a massive set of frequencies. And it's like a piano. If your notes get out of tune, your frequency wave gets out of sync, or it gets out of tune, or it slows down, or it speeds up, or the amplitude changes, or, whatever, then you end up having some kind of dysfunction in the body. And what they made clear, and I've learned some since then, is that if you get out of tune, then you're going to end up going down in terms of your health. And what you want to do is to put foods in you that contain high levels of minerals. Minerals are very powerful frequency generators. You eat them, and then they move through the body, and they make an effort. Usually it takes a little bit of time. You can't eat one meal and have a big difference. But over time, you retune yourself back to your perfect state, back to your perfect configuration of frequencies. If you get too far out of tune, something disastrous is going to happen. And so constructive interference is when you eat something that has minerals in it, and those minerals then, just by the principle of constructive interference or resonance between their frequencies and your frequencies, they bring your frequencies back into tune and back where they should be. And if you eat something bad for you, if you eat something bad, and let's say you eat rat poison, okay? That's a disaster for the body, and all the frequencies break down, and you will likely be very sick and maybe even die. Or you eat something that causes severe diarrhea. That's your body saying, frequencies are breaking down all over, and the body only has one choice, and that's to get rid of whatever it was that you ate in order to remove those frequencies from the body. And so you'll have severe diarrhea until that occurs, until that state when you no longer have any of those destructive frequencies in your system. Because you can have constructive or destructive interference in your frequencies. And so the human is a plasma being. And here's, I think, what is really important. The plasma is, let's not have a lesson in electricity and electromagnetics. Let me just say that plasma responds directly and immediately to consciousness. So that all those people who for years were saying, I'm trying to think good thoughts, or I'm trying to send good thoughts, they were right on track. They were doing something positive. When you have something in your feeling state that you don't want to admit, you don't want to feel, and you don't want to think about, you're making a mistake. Because you stall those frequencies within yourself. So the secret to good health is when something happens that really bothers you, you feel it all the way through. You examine it in great detail. You allow yourself to contemplate, what does this mean? How does this affect me? How does this change who I am and how I am and why I am, etc.? And when you have finished going through every single aspect of that thing that bothers you, and you have extracted all of the gifts of perception and knowing that it offers you, it gets used up, and your frequencies restore. But when you wall it off, you're literally walling off some part of your own physical system so that it doesn't know, doesn't feel, doesn't respond, doesn't acknowledge something, and then that becomes a block in your own system. It's kind of like putting a big rock in a small creek, and the water now is like, it's got to go around it. There's all kinds of strange energetic formations that form in that water, and it could be really, put too many rocks in the way, and now you've got a dam, and energy stops flowing altogether. So that principle, that same principle, holds true in the body. And the other thing I think that I really would like to mention is we had this little visit. They had this lecture that they gave me on the nature of vitamin A from something, let's say a sweet potato or a melon or a peach or whatever. In one section of the world, that vitamin A would be slightly different from the vitamin A in another section or area of the world because the energies are slightly different. And at the time I thought, how could that be? And it was later when I was studying plasma physics that I understood what an isomer was, and that you can have all sorts of isomers. They're all vitamin A, but they all have a little bit different construction to their molecule, and that affects the people in those areas, who live in those areas, in a very powerful and positive way. So when we eat food from Chile, or from Mexico, or from wherever, we're getting the vitamins and frequency sets that would have benefited the people living in that environment, in that kind of weather system, in that kind of seasonal changes. That would have kept them healthy. It doesn't really benefit us as much as it could if we were eating food that we grew ourselves. So lots and lots of stuff about food that I learned with them, and then refined that later as I spent 15 years with Dr. Levengood in the plasma physics business. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it brings to mind a lot of what they were talking about, some of these old adages, or even from ancient medicines, for example, Ayurveda, like eating seasonally and locally, and how just that basic practice is really kind of keeping in tune with what they were telling you. But one of the things that I found fascinating when they talked about these constituents, whether they like be the minerals or the chemical elements in plants, they almost described the plant as sort of like a music school or a vibration school, where these elements can learn to create this symphony of frequencies and tones that you then consume through the plant.
That is true, and I did not understand how that worked, but later what I understood was that if you take, let's say you get a vitamin or multiple vitamin or multiple mineral, and it's not organic, and I don't mean organic in the sense that it was raised on an organic farm. I'm talking about organic actually means ready to be used by the human body. And so an organic vitamin or mineral is ready for the body to use. And what we have done in our world is to make artificial constructions of, say, vitamin C or vitamin D or vitamin K or whatever, and have said, okay, this is vitamin D, and then people sell it. And then other people buy it and take it, and it doesn't do very much. It doesn't do anything. And part of the reason is because it's not organic. And when I say it's not organic, what I mean is that the frequency sets that hold the particles in a relationship within that molecule, those frequencies, a lot of them are missing. And so the particles are not in the organizational pattern that they need to be in, that allows them to be utilized or attached by the cells. And so, and if they have a strange charge to them, everything is electrical in the body. The charge, the cell may reject that particle or that nutrient because it's got a strange charge on it. And so two negative charges repel one another, and two positive charges also repel. So it's got to be just right. It can't be too negative or too positive. It has to be just right. And then the construction of the particles in that molecule have to be all in the right places. It's like, oh wow, it's an orchestra. And what we have is the need for when a mineral spends time in a living system, it ends up moving into position in a way that makes it perfectly able to be absorbed by the human cells, human body, and utilized. And that often that doesn't happen for a lot of stuff that we put in ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So the body does all this work to digest food and doesn't get any payoff. There's no payday at the end of the day. And they've used all kinds of all kinds of energetics and supplies. We use parts of our own, nutritional supplies to digest. And then there's nothing in the food.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and like going further into health and sort of like this major conundrum we've gotten ourselves in eating processed foods, which the robes were telling you that there was going to be major issues that were coming up. In one part, they talk about, and I think this is also really relevant as it relates to what we're dealing with, that how cases of old plagues and strange new ones, diseases that kill even more quickly and mysteriously than old ones once did, and that those would be accompanied by an increase of cancer and heart disease and digestive system issues, which we are obviously seeing and we have been seeing for some time now. And that these diseases that we once thought were the problem of the very old would begin to appear in children, which sadly has come to be very true. And I have seen this firsthand. So we're seeing all these things. And I know that, like, I can only imagine, Penny, this is just like a sliver of all of the information that they gave you. And you're seeing this come to light. What advice do you have for people, just even in terms of health? If there's just some basic steps for people to walk away with today about health and to help support our future generations, what would that be?
I would say that there are steps that you can take. There are certain pieces that are non-negotiable. Those pieces are, you have to have good water. You have to do some detox. That's inner housekeeping in the body. You really have to look at your food and what are you putting in and what are you not putting in. Because a lot of people, it's not what they're eating, it's what they're not getting. And then because the food system is so deficient, you really have to know how to do a supplement program that's simple but complete. And then you have to exercise. Absolutely non-negotiable exercise, because exercise generates electricity in the body-mind system, and that electricity is used for hydraulic pressure to move stuff in and out of cells, and it's also used to drive some of the transactions that have to happen in order to keep you healthy and flexible and limber and all of those things that, mental things as well. So those are the main pieces. And then, I think it's really important. I'm going to add a little something, and I was just talking about this with somebody this morning. The food system that we have, let's back up just a step. Food, the main focus, the main responsibility of plants is to take care of humans. So, and to feed humans and mammals, okay? So when you have a plant in a garden or in your house, it doesn't matter, and you wander past that, or you water it and you feed it, or you tend to whatever's in your small garden, your energy field, which is roughly, even in a fairly unhealthy person, is going to be 16 to 20 feet in diameter. It's 60 feet when you're really super healthy and in some of the really high states of consciousness, altered states. So your energy field is washing over plants. Plants are intelligent, and they will immediately say, oh, wow, what do we need to, how can we, etc., shape or what do we need to put in our fruit? Farmers call everything fruit, whether it's grain or vegetables or fruit. What do we need to put in our fruit that will correct the frequencies in that guy who's taking care of us? Because the plants assume that the person taking care of them is the one who's going to enjoy that fruit, who's going to eat that. So they correct for whatever is missing in your system. When we went to the system that we have now, which is massive agricultural systems done by machines, then we moved away from the benefit of that kind of intelligence then producing fruit that was specifically for us. So what I have said to people, because not only because the big agricultural system we have is going to be changing dramatically over the next few years, it's really, really a good idea to at least grow a few things that where you tend those plants and you eat what they produce for you, because those will be super nutrient types of things for you. And it doesn't have to be everything. You don't have to grow the whole kitchen cupboard full of stuff. But at the very least, some greens, maybe some potatoes or some sweet potatoes, maybe some strawberries, things that you could grow in your backyard in a barrel or in a small plot, etc. And just tend to that and talk to those plants and water them and feed them. And the difference in those foods is astounding. It's absolutely astounding. So I have had from my garden, a little kitchen garden out on the, behind the building here, cucumbers that are 5 feet long, cabbages that are 5 feet wide. Huge. So heavy, cabbage so heavy I couldn't even pick it up hardly. The food doesn't rot is another thing. If you have a small garden, give it some minerals. Minerals are the key to good health. And when the plant has access to the full range of minerals, it builds itself perfectly, and then you do not need a refrigerator. You just put it on a cupboard, and it's best if you don't pick it until you're going to eat it. But even as an experiment, I have done lots of this. Put something on the cupboard, and put a head of lettuce on the cupboard, and put a head of lettuce from the grocery store on the cupboard, and see what you've got in 2 or 3 days, and put a head that you grew and see the difference. It's like, wow.
Thank you for that. I think that there are many people listening in who are either already doing that, or like really they're making it a priority, or they know that they want to bring in and start to grow and build a relationship with their own food. And that being part of this movement toward personal sovereignty and self-sovereignty, which seems to be a through line message throughout the entire book from the robes, is the importance of us really cultivating our inner authority and sovereignty. So I'm not going to touch on so many of these other changes that they talk about, the transitions, such as the breakup of nation states and the nations and the government, which we're kind of already seeing bits and pieces of that, and other transitions. They talk about several things that would be helpful for us to be aware of, or to know or do, to make these transitions a bit more, tolerable, I guess, or so that we don't suffer as much. And I think that that's an important message. So what do the robes mean by, preparing properly? Like, what are some of these things that we can do as we begin to move through some of these really big shifts that we're already seeing happening in place?
Wow, that's a tall order. I really did not quite understand what I could do, so I just started. Okay, just did what made sense to me, which was really which I hated to do, because when I left the farm, it was like, ha, I'm going to be with the sophisticated people. and and then later on, I found myself right back to all that knowledge that I had been raised with. But what they said was, oh gosh, I could go in so many directions. They wanted us to take responsibility for ourselves. Inner authority was a big thing that they kept coming back to. And inner authority is the ability to be self-sufficient and to decide and do for yourself. And they wanted each one of us to take care of ourselves first, because then we would be able, if we so chose, to take care of someone else that might be in need, or might be hurting, or might be struggling in some form or fashion. So there was this whole sort of because of the things I had seen, which I don't want to get into that too much, was like, oh wow, all of our systems are going to change. So I would say, have the supplies on hand that you need for to be able to feed yourself. And the way I grew up, you were always growing food this year for next year. It was just the way that we lived. Okay? So that was always, it was a constant thing. And so I would say to people, what are you going to eat 3 months from now? Or where are your basics? Then there were herbs, lots and lots of plants. I know lots of herbs and plants and things, although I have to say I haven't used that as much as I thought I would once I became a naturopathic physician. I learned some other things that added to that. So to understand how to use food to heal, to understand how to use herbs to make food that's totally plain be absolutely fabulously delicious. The whole idea of understanding, being ready to develop your own consciousness, that was a big thing for them. They said you may end up having to be able to communicate without all your fancy technology, etc. If your government falls apart and your country comes unglued, what's your plan? What are you going to do? And so there were lots of things that I did in my own life that were just geared to say, well, okay, if this happens, I'm ready. If that happens, I'm ready. If such and such occurs, I'm kind of ready. So that kind of thinking I tried to detail in the back of the book, where I think there's a paragraph toward the back that says, do you have this? Do you know that? Who are your neighbors? What do you know about healing? What do you know about food preservation? What do you know? All these questions, because those were the things that, after watching what they showed me, I thought were basic, absolutely necessary basics. And if I never needed them, well, that's fine. But they were there if I needed them. And they were, how do you distill water? How do you get pure water? How do you get tasty distilled water? Et cetera, et cetera. All of those things. How do you, there's just so many how questions that I think we have to ask ourselves. And then I think the question for us became, when I say us, I mean myself and my family, became what kind of house do we want to live in? How efficient does it need to be? What kind of backup heat do you need to have? What kind of backup water? What kind of backup electricity? And so, we built a place that has 3 levels of electricity in it, emergency only, and then partial commercial, and then full commercial. And we built a house with 3 levels or 3 layers of insulation in it, and super thick walls, and on and on and on, all kinds of things, all done for energy reasons. And then we set up kitchens that will allow us to process large amounts of food at a time. And we bought freezers and put those freezers on the emergency circuits so that they would, be able to preserve what we had in them if we should lose power, and set up generators and, all kinds of stuff. So, how do you cut hair? How do you sew clothing? Do you know how to make mittens if you're in the north? Do you know how to get temporary cooling, or how to, provide ice or things like that if you're not in the north, etc.? Who's growing what in your region? And are you connected to them? And is it organic? So a lot of questions, a lot of things that we spent time putting in place with the idea that hopefully we would never need them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Penny, I think that if we had this conversation even just a year ago, January of 2020, I know that there's some individuals and groups that were already thinking in that way, kind of like, the prepper mentality, or we know this is not going somewhere good, so we better prepare. But the majority of the world was not in that state of consciousness until, I would say, the pandemic hit. And then it seemed like, again, it's not the entire planet, but like there definitely was this mushroom of consciousness and thought around, what are we doing here? Like, what if life never goes back to, quote, normal, and all of these things that we have to have in place? And so I feel like there's a lot more receptivity to some of the things that you're saying, because I myself have been in this process, so it doesn't hurt as much to hear this, but I can just feel, somebody who is like, what the heck are they talking about? Is the world going to end? Like, like anxiety kind of going off. What do you have to say for those who might be like, oh my gosh, I'm already in a state of anxiety, and this is kind of like feeding the fear that I'm feeling? Is there anything that the robes had to tell you, or that you have to say about the fear and how we can align ourselves?
A couple of things. I think one of the major things, and this is why they kept coming back to your own inner authority. They said, you've lost your inner authority, and that is your right to look around at yourself and see what you need and do what you need to do, and act without waiting to be told it's okay to act. To think what you want to think without being told that's okay, it's socially acceptable. And to speak in such a way that you don't have to worry about political correctness, you're speaking your truth. So I think that is the first thing. You have to get to a place where you're realizing that I am not the victim here. I'm not a victim of whatever the system is. The people care. This is the second thing I would say. Recognize that other people care. And it only takes one person in a group or in a neighborhood or in a town to say, hey, let's meet and talk about how do we take care of everybody? How do we run things or organize things to handle this crisis? And then you just set a day and a time and open the door and make the coffee and invite people in and hear what they have to say. And there is a need to be willing to listen to some griping and, some people who are rah, 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 and carry on. But beyond that, you could bring them back to how do we take care of everybody? What do we need? And then I think we have to think about what is the world? I don't think the world is going to go back to what it was before. When you change consciousness, and that's what this whole pandemic has done, you change behavior. You change possibility. So we're not going to go back to what we had. And I think it's going to be kind of a slow, kind of crumbling process, which gives people time. So don't panic. And I think if we can get to this place where we start to think instead of, oh, what is it? The sky is falling. The sky is falling. Kind of thing, Chicken Little kind of thinking. If we can say or get to a point where we're looking at how do we want the future to be? What should houses be built to do? How should food be grown? How should we be healing? There are fabulous new tools and new techniques that are out there that are for everybody, and they haven't been marketed or put out because there've been people in the way who don't want that for us. And so we have to then say, well, now wait a minute, we're in charge here. We're doing this, and not fight with somebody over that. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't require fighting. It just requires being quiet and quietly going about, setting up your life to be the way you want it to be. One of the things the robe said was you'll have to get past the idea of jobs. You have to be more self-sufficient. I was freaked out at that point. Mm-hmm. They said you are not going to be able to raise your sense of inner authority and still be working as a laborer in some job. You really don't have any control. You don't have any say unless that corporation or business is really a team. And they are all working together, and they're doing so very consciously. And I imagine there's a few corporations out there that are either doing that or very close to doing that. Maybe not perfectly, but with a few people speaking up in a kind of clear, non-aggressive way, but very, no, I'm doing this. I'm going this way. You go that way if you want, but I'm going over here. I'm doing it this way. That kind of thinking has to seep into our consciousness. There's more than enough for all of us. We have allowed a small 1% to have control of all the stuff that we need. Mm-hmm. And not the other 99% is like, hey, I need some of that, or I need this, or I need that. And it's like, what kind of game is that? So I think we are going to have to examine, how do we have this world organized? And what are we going to support? What are we going to pull away from? And can we do that in a slow, relatively pain-free way? It's scary, yes. But if you can do that, then you're in a place that is absolutely a whole different world from what we have today. So, or what we had, let's say, last year before the whole pandemic thing hit. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of, I think one of the things that we have to look at also is our system, our governance and financial systems. Are they working? Were they working? Were they working well? If they were not working well, and that kind of system can be used to do that kind of hanky-panky, then do we want that? Is there some other system that we could put in place and utilize? All of those kinds of questions. Mm-hmm. Yes. Right in front of us.
I've had a couple of parents reach out to me when they found out that I was going to interview you. And I know that this is a whole nother podcast episode, but on human development and children and education, and they cover all of that. But they wanted to know if there was any advice or perspective for the parents that are bringing in new children into this world that is transitioning today, that you might be able to impart upon them.
Okay, so the potential of the human has been pretty much destroyed by the education system that we had. The brain and the human brain and the human consciousness has almost unlimited potential to it. There are people now, not very many, but a few, who, and it started slow, 25, 35 years ago, who are learning how to raise a child that has extraordinary capabilities and IQ and capacity to learn and joy of life, etc. So I would say one of the things to be aware of is that the stages of development, I hate to try to, I hate to say anything about my own books here, as I'm not trying to sell my books, but in my first book, The Evolving Human, there is, I think it's chapter 14, 15, or 16, or maybe all three of those, 15, 16, 17. But in the back of the book, the last 2 or 3 chapters, I talk about what happens when a child is raised correctly and how to do that and what they need to be allowed to do, etc. And so I would recommend just getting the book just for those couple chapters if you are interested in learning how to think about raising children. The second thing that I would recommend is that you investigate some of the, I should have this at my fingertips and I don't. I'm actually working on some online education system ideas, because that's one of the things I saw with the robes was the new education system, and it's phenomenal, and it's all done online, and it's really through community groups online educating themselves and their children. And I'm just involved in a small project right now to bring some of that to fruition. But long story short, when you understand how to use accelerated teaching and learning techniques with a child or a teen or an adult, and you allow the child to learn using those techniques, then the internet is perfectly positioned and works perfectly for that kind of learning, because it's a very small portion of the day, maybe an hour, hour and a half, that you are online, and then you are out in the real world, hands-on learning, hands-on projects, working on your portfolio, and you start with that from, say, 3rd grade on, and even earlier in some cases. But we need to institute cradle-to-grave learning, because there are the capacities. One of the things I want to implement is how to teach your children to see without using their eyes, to hear without using their ears, and to be able to develop their clairvoyance, their clairaudience, their clairsentience, their sense of smell, their clairnasence, clairgustance, which is your sense of taste, being able to taste something without putting it in your mouth. All of those capacities lead to what I call superhuman people. And I think there's a movie out even called Superhuman, which you can get on Amazon, which shows the training now being done with children, and they're playing tennis with blindfolds on. They're riding bicycles down the street. They're playing baseball. They're reading books word for word, and they are wearing full-on blindfolds. What are we doing that we're raising people who don't even have the capacity to think critically?
So many implications for that, I think, as we think about the future that we want to create, right, and some of the things that the robes had mentioned that you could potentially avoid and that we would love to avoid.
And let me add one thing. If you raise a child with those kinds of capacities, what happens to the parent? Now you have a parent who's totally dysfunctional compared to that child. What has to happen there? That parent has to go through that same training. Otherwise, they're never going to feel like they have things in hand. They're never going to feel like they can develop that child, because they're going to be afraid of their own child. And so there's a whole new kind of approach to learning, to education, to human development that's happening, that's unfolding. That's really very exciting. But we have a long way to go. And I think the potentials are almost unlimited.
Beautiful. Well, I'll make sure to have the links of everything you mentioned in the show notes. If there's anything else, Penny, that you would like to, send over my way to have included in the links,
Okay.
just let me know. And I know we're coming at the end of our time here. There literally is like hours and hours of content that we could talk about. But I just have one sort of last question that we can sink our teeth into, I think, as we close and wrap up. And that is around Christ consciousness, which is something that the Robes had mentioned toward the end of your book, and in relation to your future, like at this time when they were telling you, which was the early 80s, and that you had to move into what was called Christ consciousness. And your reaction was so hilarious, because I think it would be the reaction of a lot of people that maybe, have a particular understanding or maybe a certain kind of relationship with religion or Jesus or Christ. And so I just wanted to create some space to clear up, like, what do they mean by Christ consciousness and this type of nomenclature? Like, what do they mean by that?
Okay, well, they did not mean what I thought they meant. So I'll start with that. Christ consciousness is, by definition, an awakening process. It's not something that comes on you all at once. There are stages of awakening. There are stages of development. I've been in most of those stages. You come to a place where you don't think in terms of, let me say it this way, where the only way that you think is globally. Okay, you're big picture almost all the time, and yet you are detail as well. Okay, those don't usually go together, but in Christ consciousness they do. Christ consciousness is the state of being in a constant state of love, constant state of bliss. And every single thing that you experience that happens is a joy to your heart. There's no fear. There's no anger. You can't be triggered into anger. It is in the ancient days, before we got to the patriarchy, in the days of the matriarchy, there was a term that was used, and that the matriarchs were very, very conscious of trying always to develop or to awaken human beings to their full consciousness. And so when you had achieved that, then you would be given a title, and that title was you were a Jesus. It was similar to saying you were a doctor today, or you're a scientist today, or a healer. But it meant you were now a teacher-healer for almost everybody. A Jesus was a teacher-healer. It was a title, not a person. Okay? So that there were exercises, there were technologies that were in use, there were techniques. We've lost almost all of those, but they were used to develop humans so that they would enter into that awakened or heightened awareness, that state of consciousness in which they were very, very intuitive. They lived in peace, a pool of peace, which makes all kinds of things possible when you are utterly still inside all the time. And so that whole process, I've been in the end stage of that a couple of times now. It's phenomenal, but I'm not done here. So there's no point in going to that, because you don't stay here once you get to that point. And there's still a lot of work to be done here. So that's in a nutshell what Christ consciousness is. And that was the original meaning of the term Jesus, a Jesus. And there were all sorts of Jesus figures, all sorts of Jesus beings, people, back in the days of the matriarchy. So
I really appreciate your reflections at the end of looking at, as a collective, looking at the second coming as almost this shift in consciousness as a group versus as, a savior, one person coming to save us.
Yeah, that's I don't know. The Robe said at one point, you're never going to be able to move ahead or drive forward looking in the rearview mirror. You have to look forward. And I think that the idea of a single Jesus, that, there's a lot of controversy around that whole Jesus thing to begin with. But leaving that aside for now, I've done some research, a lot of research around that whole concept. And so we could go on for a whole show just on that. But that, I think the awakening is what we're experiencing right now. And there's a lot of people that are waking up, that are saying, hey, something's not right here, this isn't working, that kind of thing. And so we're starting along that path. I love it. I'm so grateful.
Yeah.
So,
I feel in the face of everything that we're experiencing and a lot of the fear and anxiety that's coming up for people around loss of what was, I think that your words and sort of this understanding of what we can shift into really is a solace. It brings some hope, I think, for a lot of people listening in.
Yeah, there's nothing to be afraid of. We're here to take care of one another, and we will. There's nothing that we need to, well, I have to say this. Even I have grieved what we had long before this whole thing happened. Okay. Some years ago, I started the grief process and realized this is something I have to go through. I was raised in that world. It was working. I had my illusions. How come we have to change? Well, we do. And yet what I see us moving into is so wonderful. I just cannot help but be excited. I can't help but say to people, it's okay, hang in there. It'll be somewhat messy, but it's not going to be messy all the time. It's not going to be messy in every place. And so if you're in a place where it's messy, you may have to move. If you're not, then, get yourself together and get your little bricks in a pile and get yourself centered and think about what kind of world do you want to live in, and how do people treat one another? How do they heal themselves and take care of themselves? How do they raise their children? How do they interact? What is it about money and governance? We do not want to give up self-governance. If we give up self-governance, we're lost. So the whole thing that's going on with the government right now is just symbolic of our decision that we're facing right now is, are we going to take responsibility for governing ourselves or not? That's all it is.
Mm-hmm. Huge question. And I think we're all answering that within ourselves in these days. Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter whether you're left or right. I think that they both have some beautiful things. Bring those two sides together, and wow, we have. I think some of the things that people are saying we need and we want are things we need and want. Why aren't we listening to ourselves? So, yeah, it's been really quite an education this last few years. Actually, I have to say this whole lifetime. There's nothing to worry about, nothing to fear. There are changes that will have to be handled. That's it.
Yeah. Well, Penny, I am like speechless because there's just so much more. And I really honor that you committed, you said yes. And you took that time and energy to put this together for us to digest, and in just the right time, I feel for these really big transitions. I have one tiny last question. I can't let you go before we end. We must know, Penny, what is currently feeding your wild, whether that's body, mind, spirit?
The situation on the planet right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
What feeds my wild is, and I'm not even sure I understand what feeding your wild is, but there's a part of me that when I was growing up, I really didn't have much of a dream, except I wanted to become a doctor. And then when it became clear that wasn't going to happen, it was like, okay, well, maybe I wanted to travel and write. And so now what really it's come down to, when you have a kundalini experience, you know what you're here to do. You know it. You know what your purpose is. You know why you came. And so in a nutshell, my purpose, my reason for being, is that I came here to teach the world about the mind and consciousness. And at the time when Kundalini first happened and I was first knowing that, it was like, that is absolutely impossible. I have no idea what, how, who, what, blah, blah, blah. and so now I look at how things have changed. One of the things the little men in brown robes said to me was, when they showed me what I was going to be doing, I was like, ain't no way. Let me use farmer jargon. Ain't no way. And that, when they said, now don't freak out. It'll all happen very naturally. And it has. And I have come to a place in my life where I'm really realizing, yeah, okay, you cannot teach people who are not ready to learn. And what has happened in the last couple years with our whole nation, our government, our Western civilization, is that it's really not working. If we want to change the civilization, you have to change the consciousness. Otherwise, you're going to end up creating the same thing you already had. And so now it's become really clear to me that even though I thought it was absolutely wild and preposterous, back when Kundalini happened at the age of 31, that I see that, yeah, okay, bring it on. Yeah, let's change this. We need to do this. We need to change consciousness. We need to understand how we're made and how we function and what's possible for us. So that's what feeds my wild.
Amazing. Penny, thank you so much for all of that, for all that you do. And where is the best way for people to find you and your work?
Well, I think probably the best, I have a website. It's called consciousnessonfire.com. You can go there. You can also go to pennykelly.com, which takes you to consciousnessonfire.com. I have a Patreon, so Patreon/pennykelly. I have a bunch of YouTube channels. I have BitChute. I have a bunch of books. You can go to Amazon and find my books, and they're all there. And so I have classes. I teach classes. I have 3 times a month tea and consciousness conversation that I have with people from all over the world. We talk. We ask questions about consciousness and spirituality and everything. Food, health, government, all kinds of stuff.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Penny. I'll make sure to have all the links in the show notes. And once again, everybody, I highly recommend. This is probably one of the most important books I've read, Penny. I'm not, I'm not exaggerating there. So I really appreciate you and your courage to put it out there.
Yeah, I just recently got to the point where I thought I need to send a thank you to the robes. I get it, guys. I get it. I'm sorry I wasn't very cooperative back then. Thank you. Thank you for showing me these. There's so much in the book about what we're coming to, and what they wanted us to see was not the disaster, but what we're going to create and the potentials there. That, I think, is really important to be able to have something to hang on to.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Thank you, Penny, and have a beautiful rest of your evening.
Thank you. I will. Thank you. You do the same.
Hey there, I made something for you. One of the biggest challenges that I hear from people is that they are feeling stuck when it comes to their health. You're a smart, capable, and creative change maker, right? And you know what you should be doing for your health. So what gives? Well, it's not about willpower. And I wanted to create something that would help you to unlearn the things that are keeping you stuck so that you can get out of your own way and master the mindset of health. That's why I created Wildly Unstuck, where you'll learn the top 5 things that I have found to sabotage your health goals and what to do about them. You'll learn what it really takes to become committed and unstoppable when it comes to your health goals and find the clarity you've been looking for so you know exactly what to do to get back into alignment. And I made it totally free. So if this is something that you want to dive into and create a vision and soul goals for your health and your life and bring your gifts to the world, because we know that we need it, then I invite you to join us in Wildly Unstuck. You can find that at wildlyrooted.com/unstuck. I'll see you on the other side.